If you turn with me to Ruth chapter 4, we're getting close to finishing up the book of Ruth. We're going to look at the first half of the last chapter here of Ruth. Ruth chapter 4, we'll be reading through verse 12. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. Then he said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you all of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here, and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, that I may know, for there is no one beside you to redeem it, and I come after you." And he said, "I will redeem it." Then Boaz said, "The day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance." Then the Redeemer said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." Now, this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself," he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilon and to Mahlon. Also, Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day." Then the people who were gathered at the gate and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephraim and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman." A couple weeks ago, we ended Ruth chapter 3 with Naomi telling Ruth to wait. Remember, she said, "Wait, the man will act. The Boaz won't rest until this thing is taken care of today." And that's really a beautiful bridge here into chapter 4. Ruth waits, Naomi waits, and Boaz acts. And so we move from the threshing floor to the town gate. We go from a private promise in the night to a very public legal proceeding in the morning. We go from Ruth asking Boaz to spread his wings over her to Boaz going to secure her redemption before witnesses. You see, redemption is not just a feeling. Ruth cannot be redeemed by Boaz's sympathy alone. Naomi's family line cannot be restored by Boaz's good intentions alone. The inheritance of Elimelech cannot be secured by private affections alone. And so Boaz must act. He must go to the gate. He must deal with this nearer Redeemer. He must submit to what is right. He must bear the cost. He must secure the matter publicly. You see, Ruth chapter 4 is not just the happy ending of a love story. It's the legal rescue of a family line. And more than that, it's another step in the preservation of the royal line that will lead to David and ultimately to Christ. And so let's look at the passage. Boaz has gone up to the gate and sat down there, verse 1. The Redeemer is taking initiative. We begin by focusing here on Boaz. A little bit different. We've been seeing Naomi and Ruth. It might even make sense for them to focus a little on the nearer Redeemer. But here, it's Boaz. If you remember back in the end, as I said, Boaz isn't going to rest. He's going to take care of the matter today. And now the narrator is showing us he does exactly what he said he was going to do. Or what Naomi said he was going to do, rather. And so he goes up to the gate. He sits down. He calls the near Redeemer over. He calls the elders. He begins the legal process. And everyone else is responding to him. The whole time, Ruth is at home waiting. Naomi is at home waiting. And so the near Redeemer happens to come by. The elders are summoned. The people gather. The town gate isn't just the entrance to the city. It's the place where the place of business for the town would have occurred. It's the town hall or city hall. You know, right down the street here we have city hall. I don't know if they have actual courthouses in there or courtrooms in there, but this legal matters would have been handled at this place. The disputes of the town would have been settled there. Transactions would be witnessed, or we'd say notarized. And so in that sense, Boaz is taking Ruth's case to court. And there's an integrity to this. Boaz isn't sneaking around. He's not trying to manipulate the situation, although maybe a little bit, in just a second we'll see. But he doesn't try and do it in an illegal way. He doesn't say, I made a promise to Ruth last night, and so I'm just going to take care of it privately. He doesn't ignore, and he can't ignore the fact that there is another one who has the first right of redemption. Boaz wants Ruth, but he will not take her unrighteously. Boaz's love is not a lawless love. His redemption is not a manipulative redemption. And so he acts openly. He acts carefully. He acts righteously according to the law. I think this is a needed reminder for us today. Sometimes we need to remember that unrighteous means are not the way to accomplish a desirable outcome. Sometimes we can convince ourselves that because the goal is good, the method doesn't matter. But Boaz shows us something different. He shows us something better. He desires a good thing, and he pursues it in a godly way. He won't secure Ruth by violating righteousness. He won't fulfill his promise by ignoring God's order. He doesn't get to the right destination by taking the wrong road. And this should point us to Christ. Christ did not redeem us by ignoring justice. He did not save us by pretending that our sin didn't matter. He did not bring us into God's family by brushing aside the law of God, but rather he fulfilled righteousness. He satisfied justice. He bore the curse. He redeemed us lawfully, publicly, and completely. Boaz goes to the gate. Christ goes to the cross. Boaz acts so that way Ruth can rest, and Christ acts so that his people can rest. There are times when faith acts, and there are times when faith waits. Ruth has already acted in faith. She had listened to Naomi. She had gone to the threshing floor. She had made her request to Boaz. And now she has to do the hard part. Wait, while the Redeemer settles the matter. Her waiting is not unbelief. It's faith resting in the work of someone else. And that's where the gospel should comfort us. We don't need to rest, or we do not rest because nothing needs to be done. We rest because Christ has done what only he could do. Our waiting is never empty because our Redeemer is not idle. See, the Redeemer works through righteous means. So Boaz calls the near Redeemer over and he says, "Turn aside, friend. Sit down here." Now, we don't have the man's name. He's simply called friend here in this translation. More literally would be something along the lines of Mr. So-and-so. In Hebrew, it's a fun not alliteration, but almost, rhyming, I guess. He's called the Poloni Aloni. Poloni Aloni. We translate that a certain one. Today we might say John Doe or Joe Schmo, or perhaps maybe the best way would be to say, hey you. And it's kind of interesting because the narrator to this point has been very careful with names throughout the book. We know Elimelech, we know Mahlon and Chilion and Ruth and Orpah and Boaz and Naomi. These all have names and they're very consistent. But here, this nearer Redeemer is left anonymous. It doesn't seem that this is on accident either. This man has the first right, the first legal right to redeem. But this man is going to prove irrelevant to the preservation of the royal line. Kind of like Orpah back in chapter 1, he's becomes a foil, a contrast, where Orpah turned back when that hesed, the covenant loyalty, became costly. This man steps back when redemption becomes costly. At first, Boaz brings up the land. And this is where you could kind of look at it and go, well, maybe he's a little bit manipulative here. He says, Naomi came back from the country of Moab, probably as you know. She's selling a parcel of her land. She has no way to garner income for herself. She needs some money. And so she's selling this land that belonged to our brother Elimelech. And this is a fairly complicated legal situation here. The basic issue, though, is clear. Elimelech's inheritance is in danger. The family needs money. The family land, though, needs to be kept inside the family. And so she and Ruth are vulnerable, or Naomi and Ruth are vulnerable after having returned from Moab. And so what do? We sell land. But the land here represents much more than just property. It's that family inheritance. It's the continuity of Israel. It's the preservation of Elimelech's name. And so Boaz says to him, verse 4, if you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you won't, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and then I come after you. And so Boaz here is very direct. He gives the man his rightful opportunity. And the man says, I'll do it. I'll redeem the land. At this point, it looks like maybe things aren't going to go the way Ruth and Boaz had hoped, or maybe Ruth and Naomi had hoped. But Boaz hasn't mentioned Ruth yet. You see, this redeemer, we may call him a false redeemer, he wants the inheritance without the cost. Because verse 5 changes everything. Boaz says, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. I remember growing up, we had an audio adaptation of this. And I can still hear, at least what I remember it to be, where they have the city council sitting there at the gate, and Boaz says, all right, if you'll buy it, you have the first right and of refusal. Would you like to buy it? And he says, yes. And Boaz kind of stands up at the moment. He goes, well, congratulations. When's the wedding? And that I always hear that in my mind as I read this. And you hear the guy kind of go, wait, what? The wedding? We don't know anything about this man's family. Most likely, he probably would have been married. Most likely, he had another family. And what he says here kind of is in line with that. But anyway, Boaz has revealed this isn't just about the land. There's a widow in the picture. There's a family line in danger. There's a name that may disappear. There's a future that needs to be preserved. And the near Redeemer may have thought, initially, this is a profitable transaction. But Boaz makes it clear that redemption involves responsibility. He says, if you take the land, you also have to take responsibility for Ruth. If you claim the inheritance, you also have to raise up the name of the dead. That kind of raises the stakes for him. The line of Elimelech is hanging by two fragile threads. Naomi, who can't have children anymore, and Ruth, the Moabite, the widow. And so, humanly speaking, that's all that's left. Unless the Redeemer acts, Elimelech's name will disappear from Israel. And you notice how Boaz identifies her. He says, Ruth the Moabite. He doesn't hide who she is. And again, this is where maybe that surreptitiousness may be coming out. He's, pushing all the things that maybe you really don't want her. She's a Moabite after all. It's not necessarily there, but maybe. And so for Boaz, that's not a problem. He knows Ruth. He knows her character. He's seen her faithfulness. He already called her a worthy woman. But for this near Redeemer, this may have made the risk feel greater. A Moabite woman. A costly obligation. A possible son who would carry on another man's name. The redeemed inheritance that may not ultimately benefit his own household. You see, if he were to buy this and for himself, in the year of Jubilee, it would have gone back to Naomi's family. But for now, he could have the land for himself. He could work it as an additional field. But if he didn't have to marry this Moabite woman, this land doesn't pass through his family. It goes to the heir, to the son of Ruth, to keep Elimelech's name and to keep it in his family. What benefit is that to him? Why does he care about that, aside from just tradition, aside from the law? And so he says, I can't do that. No, I can't do it for myself. I might impair my own inheritance, he says in verse 6. You take the right. You do it. I can't. This kind of shows who he really is. He was willing to redeem when the redemption looked profitable for him. And now, no. When redemption becomes costly, I'm out. He wanted the land without Ruth. He wanted the inheritance without that widow. He wanted the benefits without the burden. And so he wanted the land until he realized, or until he learned, that Ruth came with it. We could probably say that Boaz wanted Ruth and was willing to redeem the land to secure her future. And so Mr. So-and-so does the math. He concludes, this redemption does not pay. What's it going to cost me? What am I going to lose? How will it affect my estate? But God's kingdom works on a little bit different kind of math. You see, in God's kingdom, fullness often comes from emptying ourselves. Gain comes through sacrifice. A man who tries to save his name may lose it, while a man who spends himself in covenant love may find his name honored by God. And so we come to the spirit of the law. Here's where we see Boaz's righteousness really shine. In a strict sense, Boaz is not the brother of Ruth's dead husband. The near Redeemer honestly isn't either. And so the situation isn't a simple one. We could turn to Deuteronomy 25 and read the passage there to try to find an exact application of that passage would be very difficult, because it says if your brother dies and he has a widow, then the brother was supposed to raise up an heir for him. And again, this is a little bit more complex than that. But Boaz understands the principle. He sees the spirit of the law. And so Boaz doesn't say, what's the minimum thing I'm required to do here? He's asking, what does covenant faithfulness, what does chesed require here? Some people approach obedience by asking, how little can I do and be technically right? How fast over the speed limit can I go and actually not be breaking the law? Boaz shows something better. He's not looking for a loophole. He's looking for faithfulness. The nearer Redeemer wants to know, what can I avoid? Boaz wants to know, how can I be faithful? It's two very different ways to live. In marriage, do you ask, what's the least I can do and still say that I love my spouse? Or in parenting, do you say, what's the least I can do and say that I've done my duty in raising my children? In our church life, do you ask, what's the least I can give and still belong? In discipleship, we shouldn't be asking, what's the smallest obedience that Christ will accept? You see, covenant love doesn't look for loopholes. It looks for faithfulness. And that brings us to the sandal. Then the near Redeemer takes off his sandal. This may seem kind of random to us. In verse 8, he says, so when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. This is kind of a nonverbal speech. He'd already told with his mouth what he was going to do, and now he speaks with his sandal. He's removed it, he's handed it over, and by doing this, he publicly gives up his right of redemption. He steps aside, he transfers the opportunity to Boaz. The near Redeemer steps out of the story, and Boaz steps in the role of Redeemer. The action publicly says, I'm giving up my right to redeem this land with this family line. Boaz can take my place. And so, again, it's not random. It's a visible legal act before the witnesses. And so it actually tells us here that in verse 7, now this was a custom in the former times in Israel concerning the redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, one drew off his sandal and gave it to another. This was the manner of attesting in Israel. So in the ancient world, again, this walking and the land were very closely connected. To walk on land could symbolize possession or claim to it. And so removing your sandal seems to symbolize giving up your right to tread on or to claim or to possess that land. And so in simple terms, he says, I'm taking my foot off of this claim. Here, you step on it. If we were to turn back to Deuteronomy 25, not the last two, but verses 9 and 10, it says, then his brother's wife shall go, this is the Levirate law, then his brother's wife shall go to him in the presence of the elders. Let me back up to verse 8. And if he persists in saying, I do not wish to take her, then his brother's wife shall go up to him in the presence of the elders and pull his sandal off his foot and spit in his face. And she shall answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. And the name of his house shall be called in Israel, the house of him who had his sandal pulled off. So this is not exactly what's happening here in Ruth, but it definitely is an allusion to it. It's very close. Ruth isn't the one who pulls off his sandal. She doesn't spit in his face. But the near Redeemer removes his sandal and gives it to Boaz. Again, this says this was an old custom for confirming the redemption and the transfer of property. And the irony here is the man who tried to protect his inheritance disappears. He's nameless in the story. And Boaz, who is willing to bear the cost of redemption, redeems Ruth and is remembered in the line of David and ultimately in the genealogy of Christ. Now, I wonder, do we love covenant faithfulness only when it benefits us? You know, it's easy to love the blessings of covenant life. It's a little bit harder to bear the burdens of covenant love. Tonight we heard from Peggy and how she didn't really get it. What's this food for? What's this help? Is it really a help? Is it just something we do to say that we're part of the church family? You know, when you're on the other side of it, it's, oh, hang on a second. This matters. Those are the blessings, receiving those things. The burdens, if you want to say, the responsibilities, I'll say, are that we care for those in our congregation. It's easy to want the comfort of church without the sacrifice, the fellowship without the responsibility, the name Christian without the burden of daily taking up your cross. But redemption is not just rescuing us from guilt. It teaches us to love like the Redeemer who rescued us. And so the true Redeemer publicly secures the future of the helpless. And now Boaz speaks. Verse 9. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses this day." The redemption is not a private affair. It's not hidden, it's not vague, and it's not just emotional. It is public, it is legal, it is witnessed, it's secured. Boaz has not just expressed interest in redemption, he's now publicly been recognized as the Redeemer. Signed, sealed, delivered, it's done. The right as well as the responsibility now belongs to him. And so he says, you are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilon and to Mahlon. And then he goes on, he says, also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife. Again, you notice Boaz isn't hiding who she is. He names her fully, Ruth the Moabite. Her Moabite identity is not denied, and it's not treated as a barrier for Boaz. He publicly receives her. And then he explains why. Verse 10. To perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. Again, this is not just Boaz gets the girl. Boaz loves Ruth, yes. But this public explanation emphasizes something much bigger than public affection, or than personal affection, rather. He wants to preserve the name of the dead. He wants to keep Elimelech's line from being cut off. He wants to secure the inheritance, to rescue the future of this helpless family. His love for Ruth is wrapped in covenant responsibility. You see, in the ancient world, to lose your name was devastating. Your name is tied to your family, your inheritance, your memory, your place among the people. Ruth 4 is full of concern for names, as we'll even see next week. Boaz acts so that the name of the dead will not be cut off. The elders pray that Boaz's name will be renowned in Bethlehem. The women later bless the Lord because Naomi has not been left without a redeemer. They pray that his name will be renowned in Israel. And then the chapter ends with names, a genealogy, leading to David and finally to the name of Christ, the Messiah, although that's not listed here. The nearer Redeemer tried to preserve his name and loses it. Boaz acts and preserves the name of another, and his name is honored. That's the way it is in the kingdom of God. Whoever would save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Boaz is not trying to make a name for himself. He's acting to preserve another's name, and God honors him. This once again points us to Christ. Christ does not redeem us from a distance. He publicly identifies himself with his people. He takes the cost upon himself. He gives us his name. He secures our inheritance. We are adopted into the family of Christ. We take his name. We are called Christians. Our redemption is not based on private feelings. It rests on the finished work of Christ in history. And so the redemption brings blessing beyond what anyone can see. And the elders here respond in verse 11, "We are witnesses." This is the notary signature. They accept Boaz's declaration. They affirm the legal proceeding. The matter is settled. And then they do more than just witness. They bless. Verse 11, and then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem." This is astonishing. Ruth the Moabite is being spoken of like Rachel and Leah. The outsider is brought in. The foreigner is being honored. The widow is welcomed. The barren woman will become fruitful. The Moabite becomes like a mother in Israel. And they don't stop there. They go on, may you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. Again, that word worthy takes us back to Ruth 3:11, I think, where Boaz says, Ruth, you are a worthy woman. And then the people pray that Boaz would act worthily. A worthy woman, a worthy man, a faithful redeemer, a restored family. And they say in verse 12, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. This is not some random reference to an ancient Israelite woman. Perez was born from a messy relationship. The story of Judah and Tamar there in Genesis 38. The story was full of sin and shame, of human failure, and yet God in his providence worked through that line. And now Ruth is being connected to that same line. Tamar, Perez, Boaz, Ruth, Obed, Jesse, David, Christ. And at the gate, the people don't see all that yet. They see the legal proceeding and the widow, the field. They see Boaz taking responsibility. They see Ruth being brought into his house. But God sees his plan for David to come from this line, and beyond David, Christ. That is the wonder of providence. God is doing more in this moment than anyone at the gate understands. What he is doing is bigger than Naomi and Ruth. The Israelites are still in the day of the judges. They have not yet asked for a king. David has not yet been born. But God is already preparing the king that his people will need. In his sovereign covenant faithfulness, God is working ahead of their need before they even know to ask. Ordinary faithfulness matters. A meeting at the gate doesn't look like it's world-changing. It looks like paperwork and a witness, a property exchange, family obligations, legal proceedings. But through that ordinary obedience, God is preserving the line of David and preparing the way for our Savior. God uses men and women who keep their word with honest dealings. He uses costly obedience. He uses family loyalty. He uses quiet integrity. The kingdom often advances through faithfulness that looks ordinary at the time. Boaz is a redeemer, but he's not the redeemer. Boaz goes to the gate, but Christ goes to Calvary. Boaz sits before the elders. Christ stands before the rulers and authorities who spit on him. Boaz paid the cost to redeem Ruth, and Christ gave himself as the price to redeem his bride. Boaz preserved the name of the dead. Christ gives life to those who are dead in their trespasses and sins. Boaz publicly received Ruth the Moabite. Christ publicly receives sinners from every tribe and language and people and nation. And this is our comfort. Boaz would not rest until Ruth's redemption was settled. And Christ did not stop short of our redemption. He came for his bride. He bore the cost. He finished the work. And when he rose again, the matter was settled forever. Ruth 4 begins with Boaz sitting at a gate. Looks like a small town legal proceeding and family property issue, maybe and hopefully the resolution of a widow crisis. But it's so much more. The rescue of Naomi's house, the redemption of Ruth, the preservation of Elimelech's line, the continuation of Judah's line, the preparation for David's throne, and beyond David, another step towards Bethlehem's greater son. Naomi thought she had come home empty. Ruth came from a foreign land as a stranger. Boaz goes to the gate as a redeemer. And behind it all is the Lord, keeping his promise. The man would not rest until the matter was settled. and neither would Christ. He came for his bride. He bore the cost, secured the inheritance, finished the work. We rest in him. Our Redeemer has settled the matter. Let's pray. Father, I pray that you would help each of us to live rightly, that you would help us to follow the right method, that we wouldn't use the wrong means to reach the end that is desired, that you would help us to trust our Redeemer, to know that he has bore the cost and secured our inheritance, that he has finished the work. Thank you that you have settled the matter. In Jesus' name.